In a cramped Indonesian cave, archaeologists uncover the skeleton of a hobbit, barely 1 meter tall. At the same epoch, thousands of kilometers away across the icy steppes of Europe, a burly Neanderthal wanders. Two distant cousins on the same branch of the human family, two radically different survival strategies, and both vanish as soon as Homo sapiens enters the scene. Watch, and you will learn why nature needed 3 different human species, and why only we survived. A little over 1 million years ago, early humans, Homo erectus, spread across an enormous territory. Some ventured into the cold, northern reaches of Eurasia, where over time the sturdy, short-limbed Neanderthals emerged. Others found themselves on remote tropical islands such as Flores, cut off by sea and volcanoes, where over generations the Hobbit, Homo floresiensis, of barely 1 meter stature took shape. These two groups were not grandfather and grandson, but side branches of the same family tree. Like cousins, they lived simultaneously in different corners of the planet and knew almost nothing of each other. Their bodies and ways of life diverged because nature set different challenges. The North demanded heat retention, hence the broad rib cages and short legs of Neanderthals. The island forced an economy of calories, and the Flores folk shrunk to spend less energy. Thus, one ancestral human line produced 2 entirely different solutions, proving that evolution is not a single ladder upward, but a multitude of paths sideways. It is crucial for us to compare these stories, to understand just how flexibly humans can adapt when faced with new conditions. In October 2003, an Indonesian-Australian expedition was digging a routine test trench in the limestone cave of Liang Bua on the west side of Flores Island. At a depth of 4 meters, the shovel struck something fragile. A tiny skull appeared, only 18 centimeters long. At first, the scientists assumed it belonged to a child. However, beside it lay an equally small pelvis, femur, and humerus, and all the bones were already closed, indicating the individual had reached adulthood. The next day, they found a pair of molars, worn flat like those of a 30-year-old hunter. The combination of child-sized stature and adult-worn teeth defied all familiar patterns. To resolve the mystery, the skull was sent to Jakarta for analysis. The internal cranial sutures were completely fused, yet the cranial capacity measured barely 400 cubic centimeters, less than that of a chimpanzee. Even the smallest Homo sapiens, with severe microcephaly, would still show a different vault shape and a pronounced chin. The debate, pathology or new species, soon produced more facts. The layer containing the LB1 skeleton dated to 60,000 years ago. Miniature stone blades and charred bones of pygmy stegodons lay alongside. This proved that the hobbits not only survived until the last ice age, but also hunted in groups, controlled fire, and butchered their prey. Subsequent excavations uncovered 7 more individuals, all the same 1-meterers. Geologists confirmed that periodic volcanic ashfalls from a nearby volcano had sealed the cave, preserving the remains exceptionally well. By the mid-2000s, the scientific consensus had officially recognized Homo floresiensis as a distinct species. Thus, in a warm tropical cave, a major correction surfaced to the familiar notion later means larger brains, forcing anthropologists to reconsider the roles of body size and intelligence in human evolution. Mid-Pleistocene Flores looked nothing like a typical tropical paradise. A long mountain ridge divided the island into a wet north and a dry south. Lava fields crept down its slopes, because every few thousand years, the Ranaka volcano, the island's fiery heart, spewed ash that buried the valleys. Surrounding seas were swift and turbulent. A high saltwater barrier separated the Sunda Shelf from the larger Asian islands, turning Flores into a trap land. Large terrestrial predators never reached here, but ancient survivors did. Giant Komodo dragons and pygmy stegodons, no taller than ponies. For small warm-blooded creatures, this meant one thing: fewer resources, fewer competitors, and no escape routes. Under these conditions, Homo erectus descendants rapidly shrunk. The long trek from Africa to Java had honed their walking and hunting skills, but on the island, every extra calorie came at too high a price. The island dwarfism rule took effect. The smaller the land area and food base, the more compact the organism in subsequent generations. Flores folk reduced not only leg length, but also brain mass. Yet their foot size and toe length increased for gripping rocky outcrops and fig tree roots. In the rainy season, the hobbits descended to low river terraces, where they built traps of sharp volcanic glass shards to ambush pygmy elephants. And at night, they sheltered under rock overhangs where embers burned for days. Isolation turned the island into a live-in laboratory. Any innovation, be it a new hand-axe shape or butchery technique, spread instantly because villages lay within a day's walk of each other. Over tens of thousands of years, Flores formed a miniature but resilient human population that thrived alongside volcanoes and giant reptiles, exploiting exactly as much land and as many resources as it could sustain, no more, no less. When archaeologists opened the cultural layer around the LB1 skeleton, they expected to find crude choppers, like those of early Homo erectus. Instead, dozens of tiny but neatly flaked blades, no larger than a fingernail, emerged from the soil. They were crafted from volcanic glass and yellow flint by striking thin flakes from a pre-prepared core. Neanderthals in Europe once produced something similar with the Levallois technique, but there the core fit in the palm of the hand, whereas the Flores micro-Levallois operated almost on a jeweler's scale. The size of the tool mirrored the size of its maker. The smaller the body, the less raw material required, and the easier it was to carry a full bag of knives across steep slopes. The blades were hafted into wooden handles to create miniature sickles for butchering carcasses. Scratches on stegodon bones show that the hobbits could strip hide in thin sheets, then extract the brain and bone marrow, the island's most precious resources, in the absence of large herbivores. Charcoal found nearby did not result from a forest fire, but from a maintained hearth. Layers of ash lay in even mats, as though embers had smoldered for weeks. This indicates that the small hunters controlled fire, dried meat, and smoked reptile skins. Perhaps the most remarkable discovery was a series of group trapping trenches. Scientists mapped embankments of stone slabs leading to an abandoned river channel. When pygmy elephants came to drink, they were funneled through a corridor straight into a pit where spear ambushes awaited them. Neanderthals deployed similar drives against bison in icy gorges. Once again, parallel branches converge, differing hunter scales, yet identical logic of cooperative labor. The tools and hunting strategies of Homo floresiensis demonstrate that even a tiny brain, around 400 cubic centimeters, can plan, allocate roles, and preserve technological methods across generations. On an island where every gram of flint was more valuable than gold, the hobbits turn limitation into advantage, proving that evolution prizes precision of adaptation over brute strength or cranial size. When scientists learned that the Flores brain scarcely exceeded 400 cubic centimeters, they initially equated its cognitive abilities with those of a chimpanzee, but the finds in the same layer swiftly contradicted this view. First, along with the skeleton, lay miniature knives and scrapers, flaked along carefully plotted lines. To detach such a flake from flint, one must visualize the intended shape and predict the crack's trajectory, a task no modern ape can accomplish. Second, neat hearths under a meter in diameter were preserved on the cave floor, lined with stones and sprinkled with fine charcoal. These fires were stoked to burn continuously for days, creating a primitive oven for slowly roasting tough stegodon meat or drying roots to make them sweeter and lighter to carry. The ability to regulate temperature marks the next evolutionary step beyond simply keeping a fire alight. Third, among animal bones were fragments of slender projectile points. They snapped just as spears do in a communal drive. The tip chipped upon impact with a rib or joint. This indicates the hobbits hunted in groups, divided roles, and likely issued brief vocal commands. The conclusion is straightforward. A small brain does not impose a low ceiling on possibility. Far more crucial are group organization and the flexible use of one's environment. The Flores folk showed that a compact processor can execute remarkably complex cultural programs when supported by cooperation and even if rudimentary, reliable technology. If we mark a timeline at 60,000, 50,000, and 40,000 years ago, a curious picture emerges. At 50,000, Neanderthal sites still thrive across Europe in the cave of Krapina in Croatia, the Abri de Croix in France, and the eastern slopes of the Caucasus. That same era yields charcoal and bone fragments in the Liang Bua site on Flores. Thus, the burly hunters of the north and the tropical pygmies lived in parallel, despite being separated by 6,000 kilometers of ocean and desert. Scientists synchronize clocks with different methods: radiocarbon dating in Europe and thermoluminescence in Southeast Asia, which reads how much light a quartz grain has accumulated since its last heating. Both timers converge on a peak of activity around 46 to 48,000 years ago. By 42,000, their traces begin to fade. There was no direct contact between them. The ocean barred the way. Yet the world was growing smaller. Homo sapiens was just emerging from Africa along an eastern route, and by 45,000, the first of our kind reached Sunda and Sahul. This is the pivotal moment. Modern humans appear in the same ecosystems where ancient cousins still held on. In Europe, we meet the Neanderthal. In the island forests, perhaps eye to eye with the Flores Hobbit, though we have yet to find clear evidence of such encounters. This chronology dispels the myth that some died out long ago, others much later. No evolutionary blink of 10,000 years saw three intelligent human species coexist. Their disappearance is not a mere coincidence, but a shared pattern. Wherever Homo sapiens arrived, both the Neanderthal and the Hobbit vanished within a few millennia. It becomes all the more intriguing to discover why our genomes endured while theirs did not. On Flores, archaeologists have identified not 2, but 9 horizontal strata containing Homo floresiensis remains. The lowest dates to 700,000 years ago, the highest to 50,000 years ago. Between them lie alternating volcanic ash and clay layers, yet tiny bones and microblades appear in every level without notable gaps. This is a rare case of an evolutionary time capsule. Body shape, brain size, even stone tool craftsmanship remain nearly unchanged for hundreds of thousands of years. It indicates that the island's stable niche favored small stature and micro tools over radical innovation. Paleobotanists have recovered charred remains of Lagenaria gourd seeds, canarium nuts, and taro tubers in the hearths. These crops appeared and disappeared, yet the human menu stayed varied. Stegodon meat, monitor lizard fat, lagoon fish, seasonal forest fruits. Such a diffuse diet supports small but sustainable populations. Estimates based on flake counts suggest 1,000 to 2,000 individuals across the entire island, like a single large village stretching through the valleys. The period between 190,000 and 120,000 years ago is especially telling, when the climate abruptly dried and sea levels dropped by nearly 100 meters. Neanderthal sites in Europe retreated southward. Whole hunting routes disappeared, while Flores, by contrast, expanded as new land emerged, and temporary Hobbit camps sprang up along coastal terraces. They quickly redrew their range as if water had receded, revealing an extra room. This longevity challenges the stereotype that a small body and brain equate to an evolutionary dead end. On the contrary, the Flores folk turned constraints into a survival formula. Low energy demands, plus a broad array of resources, plus refined yet simple technology. As long as the environment remained an island laboratory of recurring volcanic and monsoon cycles, the Hobbit system ran smoothly, lasting longer than any Neanderthal culture in the north. The last cultural layer, bearing Homo floresiensis bones in Liang Bua, dates to 50,000 years ago. Beyond that, silence. What happened to a people who had thrived on the island for 600,000 years? Immediately after the 50,000-year mark, a thick band of gray ash appears in the sediments, the distant plume from the Toba supervolcano, which erupted on the far side of the Indonesian archipelago. The ash winter lasted months, killing half the vegetation, and the remaining fauna retreated northward to wetter regions. These dwarf humans, accustomed to short foraging routes, now had to trek farther and expend more energy than they could sustainably store. Almost simultaneously, archaeologists record the first stone microliths of Homo sapiens in neighboring caves on Sumbawa and Sula Islands. Our species arrived taller, faster, wielding thrown spears, and, crucially, in large family groups accompanied by dingoes and potential zoonoses. For the isolated Flores population, any novel disease could prove lethal. Their immunity, forged in a pure, island crucible, had never encountered these pathogens. Ecology delivered yet another blow. After Toba, rising sea levels drowned the fresh coastal plains, where the hobbits had seasonally gathered shellfish. Habitable land shrank again, and competition for remaining resources intensified. Pygmy stegodons and monitor lizards, once hunted only by hobbits, now faced new rivals who burned forest patches to flush out prey. The small Flores community likely retreated to the island's mountainous heart, but the mosaic of available food niches was exhausted. Geologists seek evidence of landslides and mudflows that may have buried the last villages. Even if some hobbits survived long enough to meet Homo sapiens, their numbers likely never exceeded a few hundred, a demographic threshold, beyond which any epidemic, drought, or crop failure becomes catastrophic. Thus, by 40,000 years ago, these diminutive people vanished, leaving only slender blades of stone and a riddle. Did they witness their tall cousins passing? Or did they fade into darkness before the first human canoe reached Flores' shores? The discovery of the hobbits, and shortly before that, the complete mapping of the Neanderthal genome, forced biologists to redraw the familiar scheme. Later in time means larger brains. It turned out that the very idea of linear progress is a convenient myth. On some branches of our family tree, humans grew larger. On others, they became miniature. And, most strikingly, they did both simultaneously. Paleontologists already know examples. Homo naledi, with its small cranial vault, lived in South Africa 250,000 years ago. And another island dwarf, Homo luzonensis, of the Philippines, adds to the pattern. It emerges that brain size offers only the outer limits of memory and abstraction, but does not guarantee success. What matters more is how a species allocates energy and organizes collective work. Geneticists add further nuance. DNA analysis shows up to 3% of our genes came from Neanderthals, and parts of some Asian populations carry Denisovan fragments. This implies our cousins had sufficiently developed language and social norms to form mixed family bonds. Homo floresiensis, however, leaves no such genetic trace. Its bone collagen has been destroyed by the tropical climate, and not a single DNA molecule has yet been recovered. This reminds us that the evolutionary tree is a fragile archive where pages can burn or crumble. Absence of data is not proof of isolation, only a pause in the investigation. The greatest lesson is the concept of the human ecological niche. Half a century ago, scholars believed humans were savanna creatures. Now, we see that Ice Age caves of Europe, active volcanoes of Southeast Asia, and Philippine rainforests all served as human homes. The species did not reshape the world to fit itself. Rather, it molded itself to the world, employing a vast toolkit of biological adaptations, reduced stature, altered limb proportions, and streamlined brains. Thus, the stories of the Flores, Hobbit, and its muscular northern cousin shattered the last barrier between normal and exception. In human evolution, normality is diversity. Flores villages still tell tales of a tiny people called Ebu Gogo, waist-high, covered in hair, moving in chains, and pilfering food straight from cooking pots. Legends say the last of them hid in the karst crevices of Ngoe Ranga and were wiped out by humans only 200 years ago. For scientists, this is more than mere folklore. Liang Bua lies just 40 kilometers from villages where elders still recall the noisy children of the forest, and parts of the lore match archaeological details. Ebu Gogo wore leaves, spoke poorly, but clearly knew fire. Folklorists record these stories because they may be the final echo of a real neighbor, Homo floresiensis. Proving the connection will require DNA, but the tropical climate has worked against us. Heat and humidity have degraded the bone molecules. Geneticists typically extract collagen from spongy bone tissue, but in the hobbits, it has been replaced by mineral crust. Now, teams from Denmark and Australia are trialing a new method, extracting peptides from tooth enamel. If they can retrieve even a short protein barcode, they will compare it against all known ancient genomes: Neanderthal, Denisovan, Homo erectus, and then we will know precisely how far the Hobbit branched off from our common ancestor. For now, the Flores folk occupy an empty node on our family tree. No arrows link them to other species, only a dashed line back to the original erectus. It is like the white spaces on old maps. Terra incognita. Every new technology, protein analysis, X-ray imaging, ash spectroscopy fills in the map. But people complete the story. If the Ebu Gogo legends prove to be traces of real encounters, it means Homo floresiensis lived alongside modern humans, far longer than we thought. And our family tree will sprout new branches once again. Our family tree has proven far broader than once believed. Alongside us lived the burly northern Neanderthals and the miniature Flores, Hobbits, their divergent paths shrinking to conserve energy or growing robust for cold, demonstrate that evolution prizes flexibility over strength or brain size. By remembering these vanished cousins, we gain a deeper understanding of the fragility of our own success and the value of the diversity that still remains on Earth.